man, maybe this is just what being a middle-aged man is, but, trying to let that go and just say, well, okay, we've done the best we can. We're going to pray for you and talk to you if you want our advice. But that, you're talking about, again, it's the ultimate making a leap.
Yeah.
They're leaping, and we're back here. We're going to sit here and watch them leap.
Welcome back to another episode of Making the Leap. I always say this, but we are truly glad that you are here, that you've been here for what is coming up on 3 years. We're sitting at about 150 episodes.
Real close to it.
That's a lot of talk.
If that's not this one. Yeah, we've done a lot of talking. And as Christine said, grateful that you've been a part of it all this time. We're getting ready to make our second trip to Texas this time.
Yes.
We're going back to another edition of the National Religious Broadcasters.
Which is crazy
Convention.
to think that, again, it's already been a year, that it's already moved forward.
We had such fun
entails.
in Nashville and didn't know what to expect last year. Mm-hmm. This year, we know exactly what we're getting into, and I can tell you that between our show and the people that have had interest in talking with us about this show, and then the number of people that we have scheduled to meet and speak with while we're there on the convention floor, if for some reason you're listening and you happen to be going, come look us up.
Come find us. Yes, for sure.
So we're taking our whole team down there. From the Lion.
Yes.
And our ambassadors.
It's crazy. And I don't, I was trying to think back to like the big, or I'll call it an arena. That's not really right, but like the convention room where you go find people. So would they find us by looking for Herzog? Is that where they find us?
We're
or
on the
do
map.
They find us? Okay.
We're in booth, I can tell you specifically, 405.
Oh, I bet that's burned into,
we've been coordinating this for a while now. So we have a whole display. Our whole team is going.
Which is so exciting because last year when we went.
We were shoved in a corner.
Oh my gosh. We were in a tiny corner. We were kind of like, your eyes are really big and you're just kind of like looking around trying to take it all in. And there are clearly people there that have been there year after year with like their badges and all their ribbons and all the fanciness. And we were just kind of like, okay, what do we do? Where do we go? And it's amazing. It's a great experience to get in there.
And to know and see that there are so many people working for the kingdom in various media fields, whether it's what we're doing and
it was everything. Like it was literally walking down and figuring out that, like I use Venmo all the time. Well, there's these alternatives that are steeped in this world of faith-based areas where I'm like, I didn't even know that was something that existed, but it's awesome to see this expansion and this growth into places for people that really do want to keep their eyes where it matters. And so that was just one little area. It wasn't just an education thing. It wasn't just Bible reading. It was all these places that it kind of seeps into our daily life.
You and I were talking just before this show today because we were we were thinking about a couple of different things to do for today's show. And I'll just say, and we've kind of treaded carefully on this because our daughter being 16, she not as excited. As it's safe to say she's not as excited about being personal and dragging too much about her own life into this show. I think for a time she was okay with it. As she's gotten a little older, I think she got kind of uncomfortable with mom and dad talking about her.
Completely understandable.
But this isn't so much about her.
No.
This show is about us in wading into Christian school. Here we are in year 3, 150 episodes.
Year 3 of the podcast, year 4 of having her in school. But yes, we're at 3 of the podcast.
And I find, strangely, I'll just lay bare a confession to you today. It's just on my heart to share it with you. We've talked candidly about our time as parents in kind of discovering Christian school. I think we have entered, and oddly, she's in her sophomore year. She has 2 more years to go. And this may be, I have found, the most challenging year so far that we've had with our experience in Christian education for a lot of different reasons that we're not going to go into, and it's not particularly relevant, other than to say this has not been without challenge, and it has not been without deep thought and prayer and frustration at times, frankly. And still, 4 years into this thing called Christian education, I think to myself all the time, should I have handled this better? Could I have handled it better? Should we have done something sooner? I'm still asking myself that question.
Well, I think that's the nature, though, of being parents. Pulling aside the Christian education component, I think parents you have to do 2 things. I think you do have to be evaluating your decisions just because that encourages the growth. But I think you also have to find a place to sit in where you are and just trust if you have done the prayer, if you have done that that faith component where you have to sit back and you trust God. So yes, I'm right there with you, but I also think that's being a parent. I think it has nothing to do whether it's Christian education or anything else. You're always like, are they ready for this? Are they ready for that experience? Should we have changed that up? Should we have started this sooner? And we're always going to go back and forth on that.
So here's where I came down just this weekend. I found myself realizing, and maybe this is not profound to anybody else, but as somebody who's trying to raise their family as good Christians and trying to shepherd them as best you can, although knowing that we're all going to fall short of it, I found myself talking with our daughter and realizing, even as you raise a great biblically literate, steeped in Christianity child, they will still choose to see the world differently than you. And not that that's a profound statement, but it's funny because you think, well, there's really no way to see Scripture differently. There's really no way. I mean, I know that's a stupid statement, but I have told myself, there's really no way to read the Bible differently. There's really no way to go to church differently, really, if we all fundamentally believe the same thing. I'm finding, a 16-year-old has a different point of view. She and I are both Christians, but boy, when I listen to her talk about it, there are things where I think, okay, you're going in a different path with your faith than me, and not in a contradictory way, but just in a different way. And I found that, how do you say, it rubbed me a little wrong, and I felt it on my heart to share that with you today because I don't want to give the impression, and I know we don't on this show, that we've got it all sorted out, and that we're on cruise control till she graduates.
That honesty is really important, and I think it's to share that it's always going to be a discussion point. It should be a discussion point. I hope we're having discussions about faith and choices and leading by example and falling short in our own example well past college. Like when we talk about education, we really are talking about the whole person, not just the sophomore year experience or the freshman and college year experience. We're talking about who they are going to be. And so it makes sense that that is where we sit right now, and I think there's also a little bit of like, we have figured this out from our first two, but nope, because they're all individual kids, which we've talked about. They all make different choices. They're all on different paths, and they need us to, I think, be on that path with them. But the honesty behind this is not a cakewalk. This is not the whole Proverbs. I don't remember the exact number, but like raise a child in the way they will go, and they'll always be. No, there's always going to be questions, doubt, not just as parents, but as children, as young adults, baby adults, as students. They're going to be looking at things differently, and those conversations are really important.
I never wanted to raise any of our kids to be automatons or think just like I do. In fact, I always valued and have bragged that even though our older boys didn't go to a Christian school, and our daughter has, all of them share in common, I think, discernment and independent thought, and they challenge conventional wisdom, and they challenge wisdom they shouldn't challenge. But I appreciate, and they get it. They come by it naturally from both of us, that they think things through, they challenge, they talk, they ask why.
And there's an independence there that I love.
I love it too. But it's the temptation, and we have discussed this on the show before, and I would just implore parents to hang in there, because the temptation sometimes is to think there shouldn't be any daylight in a conversation about church or worship or what we believe. There shouldn't be any daylight between us. And that, boy, when you're still a little, and I'm speaking for myself here, when you're still on sort of unsure footing at times and trying to guide a teenager on their Christian walk while learning yourself, the tendency is to get your back up and bristle and get irritated, and
we're making all these. We've done all these things, and we put you in all these cool opportunities.
Look at how smart we've been, and you're in a great place, and you've learned a lot, and we're smart, and everything's better now. So why don't you see it? Well, they're still teenagers, and that's not the way they're going to see it.
And I kind of think that's God kind of coming in and being like, don't rest where you are. Don't rest where you are, because I'm always going to be having you. I'm allowing these situations to occur so you can be growing forward, that you can be maybe failing forward in some ways. And I think that is a piece for parents, because I also do believe that while I think we're in the best situation for her, we know that can change. And I think other parents maybe sometimes have that experience of like, oh, we found this great school, but now it might close. Or we found this great school and this great opportunity and we're in this, but my husband lost his job, or this situation's going to change. Or, wow, we're finding out that maybe, the brick and mortar Christian school isn't working and now I have to homeschool, but I don't even know where to begin. We have to be able to understand that God is continually refining us. That's the point, while he's refining our kids. And so it's never, I don't think it's ever just set. We want to get to that place where we breathe, but I kind of think God is back there like, this is for me. This is for my kingdom. This isn't for you. It's for him.
Yeah, Second Timothy this weekend was some place that I spent some time, and it's a great book because it reminds you of how foolhardy the whole idea of control is. And boy, when it comes to teenagers, and I think specifically for dads, we tend to want to just kind of let her rip and, be head of the pride and tell everybody the way it's going to be and go down. And teenagers don't much respond to that. And I try not to do that, but I do still kind of slip into it sometimes. And it's a pridefulness in its own way. We obsess over controlling things that we can't control. And that's especially true with our kids. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know. Yeah. I didn't mean to spend a whole bunch of time on this other than to just say, hang in there if you find yourself as a regular listener of this podcast for some reason and you've been considering Christian education, or you're already in it and you find it maybe a little trying at times. It is.
Yes.
I think anything worth doing is a little difficult. What I know, though, is I'm more deeply thoughtful about it every day and constantly than I ever was for so many years, which I guess is the upside.
I think it is, and that kind of is what brings us here today with this piece, because I think when we're always in the moment with our kids and we're always trying to make that right decision. But I think we also have to go back and reflect and be thinking and looking at what brought us to this point. How is God working in this? Maybe it's not exactly what we thought, but he's used these experiences to help us, kind of shed our old selves, so to speak, and put on that armor that he requires us to do. And so that is what we wanted to do today as we sit here, is just kind of talk with each other, ask, just kind of going back and forth with each other a little bit, because
a check under the hood.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Because that is something that I think had we done this sooner, and I mean, way back sooner.
Before we had kids.
Yes. I think a lot of the things that maybe we did, as a married couple, as parents, as professionals in our careers, would have probably looked a little bit different if we had taken the time to really think about what God was calling us to. But I don't even know that that wasn't even part of our dialogue, and that was the first thing.
Yeah, we weren't in a place to listen, mm-hmm. and that is something, as I've said so many times on the show before. Boy, if you're a younger person and you are thinking about having children and you haven't had that conversation with your significant other yet about your values, your value set as a Christian, and also how you intend to raise your kids. If you have not had that talk, for heaven's sakes, save yourselves the grief of being a middle-aged person with teenagers who then decides to have that talk, because it's so much harder.
But I will say, too, yes, it is harder. However, I remember very distinctly you saying to me one time, you had a conversation with a pastor years ago who kind of gave you the impression like that our oldest, it was sort of like, all right, he's already where he's going to be. Yeah. Don't worry about him. He's cooked.
Yeah. Fully baked.
And I 100% disagreed with that, because if that were true, I would not be sitting here as an almost 50-year-old, because where I was at 20-year-old is not where I am now. So I still had that whole 30 years. And what if we all approached things that way? That would be irresponsible. And so I think even if you are with those teenagers, go ahead and have those conversations, because that is what he is asking us to do, and not just say, well, we've done what we can, the rest of it's on your own. That's not true, because he's continually putting things and places and experiences in our path, which is actually one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was, do you have a moment? I mean, you grew up going to church. Your grandparents took you. You spent a lot of weekends with your grandparents going to church on a pretty regular basis. I did not. I did not do that. I went kind of the Christmas and Easter type thing, but I went to Catholic school growing up. So we each kind of had those, the upbringing in faith in different ways. But do you have a moment or an experience that sort of sparked your faith, that sort of kicked it into gear? Do you have one? I know there's probably plenty.
As a little kid?
Yeah, maybe as a little kid or like a teenager. I didn't. That's why I'm asking if you had one that kind of jumped out at you.
I remember as a younger kid in church, I have always kind of, for some reason, and maybe it was because of the way I was brought up with my grandparents, and being around my grandparents' parents, meaning my great-grandparents, I remember them being very, very elderly, and my grandparents taking me around very elderly people. I have very distinct memories of being around elderly people, and so growing up at church, when older people wanted to talk with me or engage me or would write me little notes or whatever of encouragement, even little old ladies who made me a cookie box when I went to college, the community of believers mattered a lot to me. I don't think I understood that I thought that, but that's what I now recognize as an adult man, that a body of believers in a church matters a lot. And that's why online churches and kids that think they can zoom in and watch a service or whatever, I keep telling our kids, you don't have to like our church. You don't have to ultimately come to our church, but please go to a church,
in a
physical
place.
building, and commune with other Christians and have someone leading the service that, it's our pastor says all the time, that screen is not going to bury you or come to your house
show up
if you
at the
have
hospital.
an emergency or show up at the hospital.
Yeah.
That is just so important. And something that, that's what I'd say kind of drove me, kind of touched my faith early. You?
Not early on. I do. I'm sure if I thought for a very long time, I'd have something, but my whole experience growing up was, we had mass through school. We would go, and sit there and sing. I think that's actually what probably is something that has been consistent, I would say. Not one single experience, but the consistent experience I've had is that songs in church are huge to me. So no matter what church I'm in, and what denomination, non-denominational, whatever it crosses, I can usually connect in faith with the music. And so the music, I think, is one of the things that has, I think, been used, unbeknownst to me, as a way to keep me invested. And it's kind of the place that I go to when I'm in my car, and I'll turn I'll find something, I'll pull up Spotify, I'll pull up, K-Love, I'll pull up something and just kind of go there for a minute. And I think that was from those early experiences of the hymns in church would grab me. So key experiences, losing grandparents, being at funerals, being at singing with my classmates for a service in school and things like that. That has always been in my brain. So it's that music piece. Even though I'm not a singer, I mean, I like to think I am, but I'm not I'm not up in the choir. I'm not a musician. Yeah. But wow, when I need something, it's music, and that has been there from the beginning.
We, again, having shared this story on the show, have gone through a pretty, I won't say radical, but dramatic shift as a family in our faith. And even over the last few years, where we worship, quite literally the physical church as well as the denomination, we've changed all of that. We raised our kids in the church. I don't know how seriously we thought about that. I mean, we brought them to Sunday school. Most Sundays we were there in church. When we pulled the kids out of school and we moved across the country and we changed churches and we changed denominations, here's what's interesting now. As a 20-year-old, almost 19-year-old or 19-year-old now, or soon to be.
No, like this week. Yeah.
2019 and 16. Now, having only 4 years into this new denomination, I understand and appreciate the fact that the 3 of our kids are now seeking out church, but they aren't necessarily interested in our church and the church that we're attending, because they say, I get why we left the church we left. They all understand why we left the church we left. But it seems that all three of them are now seeking something for themselves. And my initial reaction as a dad was, no, I'm the head of the house, and I've found a perfectly great church for all of us to enjoy. It's biblically sound, so enjoy it. Darn it. You will enjoy it, and you will be holy, and this will be great.
Yeah.
And that's not the way they feel. They don't hate it. They're not against it. They just, they want something different. And so each of them, interestingly, are seeking and talking about different churches. They all want to go.
Yeah.
And so I've been obsessing on this thing of, oh man, we screwed up. We've taken them out of one church, we put them in another, and they're not particularly gravitating toward it, and they're searching for something else. And I think if I'm maybe a little more, patient with myself or calm about it, and if I were really more reflective, I would see they want to go, and isn't that the point? They want to be in worship, and isn't that the seed, and isn't that the point? And maybe that's the win, and not so obsessed with the fact that maybe they don't want to sit in the pew with us and worship the way we do.
A while ago, I sent one of our kids, I'll just, for privacy's sake, I'll leave out, sure. I'll leave out that piece. But I sent one of our kids a text with what I thought was a pretty profound clip of a pastor who was, just was preaching. And it was just kind of about finding your way a little bit, but doing it biblically, like doing, laying into prayer and thinking about that. And in true teenager, baby adult way, he did not respond at all. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to keep going, so I send this stuff, and that's fine. Well, I found out about a week later that he said to you over breakfast or whatever, yeah, Mom sent me this thing, and it really spoke to me, and it was, I really thought about it a lot. And I just, in that moment, I had that realization of they're listening. They're listening and watching and thinking. And number one, he watched it. Number two, he thought about it. And when we fast forward and look at things now, he, on occasion, will get a message, or in a conversation, we'll hear, yeah, I'm prayed about that, or, God is good, or like that's there. And I thought, at that moment, I thought, okay, this is what it is about. It isn't about, are they sitting right with us every Sunday? Or are they not just focused on Sunday? Are they thinking about this throughout the week? Are they looking for a place to connect and to learn from? That is more what matters.
And they should be. And that's I was having breakfast with this same child you're mentioning when I was talking to him about, it's funny, I'm having this revelation even as we're sitting here talking about this. So, I explained to him why, as a young man, all the pursuits that I was trying to achieve professionally, why I'd gone off the rails and why that was so flawed in my thinking, and why the very best moments of my adult life thus far have been in Bible study, in worship, communing with, particularly with men, groups of men, and men's Bible study, and listening to men, older men, in some cases much older men, with a perspective that's not mine, who's been through what I've been through, and they're kind of looking back and saying, you young whippersnapper, you don't know what's coming yet. Listening, leaning in and listening to them, and having those guideposts, how that made an impression on me, and I didn't have that when I was 20. So now I have this 20-year-old sitting across breakfast from me, and I can say, go listen to older men. Go listen to older Christian men.
Yes.
Listen to them. You don't have to listen to me.
Right.
But go listen to other men and understand that the world is bigger than you, and you're not going through anything many, many other people aren't. Don't isolate yourself. Don't make that mistake. And so as I sit here and listen and we're talking, maybe making the leap, maybe this entire journey that we've been on is as much to teach us how to talk to our kids and learn for ourselves, but also help guide them beyond us and beyond ourselves out there.
Because we cannot talk. No one can. You can't talk to your kids if you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. And so even as we sit here as grown adults, I think admitting and telling our kids, all of us, like, we don't know it all. Yeah. And we can be 48 and 49 and have these aha moments that are, I think, those God winks that are specifically designed to then help us talk with our kids, which then ultimately strengthens the family unit as a whole, which is what is so severely lacking in our world is that community piece, not just in church, but in our own family. Because we start here with our little family unit, then you branch out, and then you branch out. And so I think that's what it is.
It's funny to hear people that we know who are friends who talk about raising their kids in one church and thinking everything's plodding along, and then their kid goes completely off the rails. I must say, knock wood, we haven't had that yet.
But we could.
Yeah, we could, and we might.
And we might, yeah.
But I think there's something, we're in a uniquely different setting because we have not had a kind of Rockwellian background steeped in the Christian tradition, and I think the kids acknowledge that we acknowledge that.
Right.
And sort of all five of us are kind of, if you want, making the leap at the same time.
I think we are. And we're not all together lockstep there. Like,
No.
we're all in different places, in different thought processes.
And as a dad, my tendency is to wish I could herd everybody
Right.
together. We're all going to church together. That's what I did when they were little. They're not little anymore, and they have their own brains, and they're, again, thank goodness they're all believers.
Yeah.
They love Jesus, but they're coming to that on their own, trying to figure out how to apply that on their own. And man, maybe this is just what being a middle-aged man is, but trying to let that go and
Right.
just say, well, okay, we've done the best we can. We're going to pray for you and talk to you if you want our advice. But that, you talk about, again, it's the ultimate making a leap. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're leaping, and we're back here. We're going to sit here and watch them leap.
Well, when you
know?
do that, though, I think they're looking at you and they're looking at me, and what we are doing on a daily basis. And that's something that I think is also kind of that food for thought area. Like, what I kind of know, but if you wouldn't mind sharing, what are some things you do daily that you think maybe the kids are looking at, or that are beneficial for you, necessary for you to move forward and grow in your faith walk?
Is there something I do daily that my kids could see? I don't know that that's the case, but I will say.
Do you think that might be
a part of the problem?
I don't even know part of the problem. Do you think it's necessary? I bet there's people that would say yes. Some people say no. I don't know. I'm just curious.
I don't know if I shared this story here before. I know I've told you about the story. I was with one of our boys at a bank, and the teller at the bank started sharing for some reason. I to this day won't really know why, but she started sharing that she just lost her dad, and she was going through a really kind of just tough time. There was no reason in the world why this teller would be sharing this with me. I think it was opening an account for our son with her, and she's sitting across the desk just really sharing. And I knew as I was sitting there listening to her, it was tugging at me. I got the tap on my shoulder. Pray with this woman. Pray for her. And I didn't, darn it.
Yeah.
I had our son sitting there next to me, and we're opening a bank account, and it's Saturday, and I'm like, this is a little strange.
So we got stuff to do,
I don't know, and I don't know her.
Right.
But that's what I heard, and that's what I should have done. And I didn't, and we got in the car, and I said to our son, I should have prayed with that woman. He said, what do you mean? I said, she was confiding in us. She was going through a tough time. She's a believer. You could have extended some grace and prayed with her, and you didn't do it. And I should have, and I missed an opportunity there. I don't know. I've never asked him, and I probably won't. But I hope it's stuff like that. I hope that moment where I had that realization and was honest enough to share that with my son, I hope somewhere back there he filed that away. So
the verbalizing of those things that you wish you had or should have or would like to keep this in the forefront, I think you're right that maybe I think there is value to your kids seeing you in devotions and seeing you in the Bible. But I also think there is value to letting them know as an adult, wow, this matters. This is important. This was a moment. This was when God was speaking to me. Those things, those conversations, I think are necessary if they're going to grow. There's this new kind of trend, I guess it's not terribly new, but gentle parenting or whatever, which I think is kind of silly. But it's kind of rooted, I think, in this principle of showing your warts a little bit or allowing kids to see that you don't have all the answers, or that maybe,
I do believe when you screw something up, you should apologize to your kids. I do think that's healthy and appropriate.
Right.
And I do think it's healthy and appropriate to tell the kids I didn't have the right answer, or I didn't handle that correctly, or I flew. I think that's wise and important and smart. I'd like to think I do that better now, and I do that better now thanks to what we've done with Anna in particular and Christian school. This whole
because you're thinking
has forced me to think about I never put the kids on the bus and thought about what kind of parent I was being. I mean, obviously I cared about them, but I never thought, well, I've really got to role model what I hope they'll go out there and emulate. I just didn't think about it that way.
I think that's a really good point. You're talking about thinking less in a secular worldview and more in a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
How are we going to handle this situation? Our kid crashes a car and we want to come off the rail. We want to just flip out. Yes, there is a place for you need to be thinking about this and doing this, but there's also that way of like, okay, well, what does the Bible say about carefully evaluating circumstances where you're driving down the road? I don't know. What is God saying to us about how we interact with one another? And I think that is something that we probably didn't do too much, that we are now trying to do more. When I am faced with, and we've had some things over the last year or so where my tendency is to go in hard, and now I peel back and think there's got to be a scripture about this. There's got to be a scripture about how I approach the topic of fear, or how I approach the topic of anger, or how I approach the topic of gossip, those things. Instead of that overbearing, I just want to throw my all my verbiage around, but instead I have to peel back a little bit. That is thinking biblically. It's very early on when we were switching schools and I was trying to understand the dynamics of what was happening in the school. And I spoke with a woman who, she said, she was quoting Matthew to me as she was talking to me about how we need to be in community with one another. And that really struck me because, number one, I'd never had a conversation with an administrator or someone in that role at a school who was like, well, in the Bible, it tells us this. No. And so that is what I think has probably been the biggest challenge, is because our human tendency is to get in there with the response, fix it, and instead be like, what really, without being cliche, like what would Jesus do? What really is the Bible saying about our interactions with one another? What really are we being called to when we make a mistake and have to fix it?
Or maybe just not having an answer. And maybe not having an answer is acceptable enough because you've got to have patience and be still and the waiting and no answer sometimes is the answer too. So, that's, I guess this is a rare show where we just kind of come to you laying our hearts bare because this is a time in our lives right now. It happens to be a uniquely, and not whining to you, but it happens to be a uniquely challenging time. There's a lot of good things happening, but a lot of very unique and challenging things. As older parents now with older kids, great Christian kids, but coming of age and not having every answer and really realizing, I mean, when we started this show, we were talking about shepherding a middle school girl, and now she's, now we've got kids that are almost all up and out. And
now she's looking at the next phase of her life. All three of them are looking at the next big step, which is also now for us to figure out, again, to stay connected, to stay united, to have true, honest conversations.
Because man, does
about
it come
where
at you.
God is working.
It's strange. I mean, you feel what felt kind of dark and supernatural initially that drove us to this show, that drove us to moving, that drove us to a new church and putting
new schools.
It's back. That darkness is back, I will just say.
I want to call it heaviness for me. I don't know that I would say dark, although it's there.
Yeah.
But it's heavy.
But it's working on our family
intense.
again. And so I just thought it was important that we share with you that every day is not a picnic.
No, but you know what? Because of what we've done, I also feel like we are much, not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we are much faster to say, what is God wanting us to learn in this or to do in this versus 4 years ago or 5 years ago when we were like, blow it up, we're done. We're going to just, instead, not that was the wrong decision. I think God was saying, blow it up and do the, come move, make these switches. But now I think we are much more in tune with, well, I'm going to read in the Bible. I'm going to continue to go to my women's studies. I'm going to continue to show up on, Sundays. I'm going to continue to talk with our kids and find counsel of others from the community of believers that we are immersed in, listen, and use that as the place to work from rather than work from a place of annoyance, frustration, fear.
Isolation.
Right? Like that is the verse that always I come back to is, and I'm terrible. I've already said this. I'm terrible on verses, but I actually think it's out of 2 Timothy, maybe 1 Timothy's. I think it's 1 Timothy.
I won't hold you to it.
It doesn't matter. But it was, the whole God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of self-control. And that matters when we talk about our families and our relationships and our connections and our churches and our schools. We cannot sit in a place of fear. And so I think that is where we have come. And that gives me a confidence to know that even as it's heavy and feels funky and feels like, what else, Lord? I am not sitting in a fear anymore.
Right. And, and we're not to lose hope.
Right.
But also we're to understand and appreciate the trials. Finding, that's something as an adult, trying to find the joy in the trial. I've heard lots of messages on that in the last few months, finding joy in the trials, finding joy in the challenges. Yes. Being grateful and having gratitude in the challenges.
Yes. And not confusing happy for joy either.
That's right.
Like that all I think brings us full circle to where we are.
So there you go. A bit of a Hallmark card show today. But it's
fitting for
truth.
Being,
Yeah, we haven't
especially
really,
as we head into Dallas to go to this NRB conference where if you had told me 5 years ago, Christine, you're going to be talking about faith and that you're going to be a part of that NRB world as a broadcaster, as a podcaster? No.
I got invited next month to the Turning Point Faith Convention in Gainesville, Georgia, to speak on faith in media, which again is not something I would have done.
And in fact was something you were told not to do for I think a very long time. And so wow, does God move?
God's moving, and so is Satan. And I'll tell you, it is sometimes it's an extraordinary pitched battle for our attention and our affections and our distractions. And so, anyway.
But we appreciate you being along with it.
Thanks for kind of allowing us to puke a little bit. Get yourself one of these podcasts if you're interested. Because they're helpful that way sometimes.
Well, you just flip on a phone, right?
Sure.
That's all you do.
And in the meantime, if you want to let us know your thoughts about today's show or any show, you can always go to the comment section at either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I hope you'll leave a 5-star review and a written review. You can reach out to us on social media. And we're going to put together a couple of shows down there at NRB. We're really looking forward to it. I hope you will too. Yeah. So until next week, thanks a lot for downloading Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.